Close your eyes for a moment. Can you smell the sharp, smoky scent of burning coal briquettes mingling with the crisp morning air? Can you hear the distant, cheerful ringing of a metal bicycle bell echoing down a narrow alleyway? Welcome back to a time that feels both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Today we are taking a journey back to the 1970s and 1980s in China. We will explore 20 everyday habits and rituals that were absolutely essential to our survival and happiness back then, but which might seem entirely absurd to the youth of today. These were the days when life demanded patience, creativity, and a deep reliance on our neighbors. And make sure you stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we will revisit is perhaps the most beautiful and poignant symbol of what family truly meant in those unforgettable years. Back in those days, time did not rush past us in a blur of digital notifications and endless scrolling. Time flowed slowly, like a quiet, steady river. We did not have instant gratification. If you wanted to speak to someone far away, you wrote a letter on thin paper, sealed it with hope, and waited weeks for a reply. Modern generations might look back at our lack of technology, our intricate ration coupons, and our heavily patched clothes, and assume our lives were impoverished. But they could not be more wrong. What we lacked in material wealth, we more than made up for in the sheer richness of our human connections. We lived shoulder to shoulder in crowded courtyards, sharing our joys, our meager meals, and our hardships. Every object we owned had a profound purpose, a unique story, and was treated with immense respect. Let us gently dust off these precious memories and see how those seemingly absurd habits held the true secret to a deeply meaningful and emotionally rich life. And now let us remember the great autumn ritual of storing winter cabbages. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the crisp, biting wind of late October sweeping through the narrow streets. Back then, before the era of modern supermarkets and year-round heated greenhouses, the arrival of the cabbage carts was a monumental, city-wide event. You would hear the heavy clopping of horse hooves and the creaking of wooden wheels long before you saw them. Mountains of pale green and white cabbages slowly making their way into the neighborhoods. Families would buy hundreds of pounds at once. Can you remember the sheer physical effort it took? Everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest grandparent, helped carry those heavy, leafy spheres up the concrete stairs. We would line them up meticulously on our small balconies, in the stairwells and along the brick walls of the courtyard. We covered them with old, heavy blankets to protect them from the freezing winter nights. Over the long, dark winter, it was a daily chore to check on them, carefully peeling away the yellowed, decaying outer leaves, kerning them so they would not rot. It sounds absurd today to dedicate so much space and time to a simple vegetable, but back then that cabbage was our survival. It was the comforting taste of our winter stews, the joyful crunch in our dumplings, and a true testament to our shared resilience. Let us turn our minds to the delicate, fragile pieces of paper that governed our lives, the ration coupons. Before digital wallets and credit cards, you could not just walk into a store with cash and buy whatever you pleased. You needed the right to buy. Grain coupons, cloth coupons, meat coupons, even bicycle coupons. Do you remember the texture of that incredibly thin paper, printed with faded ink in pale pinks and greens? Mothers would keep them folded carefully in a secret pocket or a small metal tin, guarding them as fiercely as actual treasure. Standing at the wooden counter of the supply and marketing cooperative was a ritual of absolute precision. The shop assistant would meticulously count the tiny squares of paper, the wooden abacus clicking loudly in the quiet shop. If you lost a grain coupon, it meant your family might go hungry that month. It created an environment where nothing was ever taken for granted. We understood the profound value of every single grain of rice, every inch of cotton cloth, and every drop of cooking oil. Today, limitless purchasing is just a click away, making the anxiety and careful math of the coupon era seem utterly incomprehensible. Yet it taught us an unparalleled lesson in frugality, discipline, and profound gratitude for the food on our plates. Think back to the brightly painted enamel wash basin that lived in every single household. It was usually white, decorated with vibrant red peonies, swimming carp, or the bright red character for double happiness. Can you recall the sharp, metallic clinking sound it made when you accidentally bumped it against the water tap? This single vessel was an unbreakable, multi-purpose companion. In the freezing early mornings, you would pour warm water into it to wash your face. In the evenings, your parents would use the very same basin to soak their tired, calloused feet after a long day of brutal labor. On weekends, it transformed into a laundry tub where you would vigorously scrub stubborn stains out of thick cotton trousers. Sometimes, scrubbed perfectly clean, it even held freshly washed apples or tomatoes for visiting guests. Over the years, the basin would inevitably get dropped. The smooth enamel would chip away, revealing the dark, rusted iron underneath. Those black spots were like badges of honor, telling a long story of decades of unyielding daily use. We never threw them away just because they looked old or battered. We used them until they physically rusted through, a beautiful symbol of our practical, enduring nature in an era that despised wastefulness. Do you remember the daily pilgrimage to the public hot water station? Running tap water was a luxury, and heating water at home was expensive and slow. So every neighborhood or factory compound had a massive, roaring coal-fired boiler. We carried those iconic thermos flasks, encased in woven bamboo or brightly painted tin. I can still hear the distinctive squeaking sound of the wooden cork stopper being pressed tightly into the glass neck. You would walk out in the freezing mist of dawn, the empty flasks swinging lightly by your side. At the boiler room, the thick white steam rose into the cold morning air, temporarily blurring the tired faces of your neighbors. You waited in line, exchanging quiet neighborhood gossip or complaining about the bitter cold. Then came the careful, dangerous act of turning the heavy brass tap, watching the boiling water violently splash into the narrow neck of your flask. The walk home was entirely different. The flasks were now heavy, radiating a beautiful, comforting heat against your leg through the thick winter trousers. That captured heat was the promise of warm tea in the afternoon, a hot towel for your face, and a small measure of comfort against the biting chill of a 1980s winter. Let us fondly recall the simple errand of buying soy sauce or vinegar. Today we simply grab a perfectly sealed plastic bottle from a brightly lit supermarket aisle. But back then, buying condiments was an interactive, sensory adventure. Your mother would hand you an empty, sticky glass bottle and a few small aluminum coins. You would run as fast as your little legs could carry you down the winding, dusty hutong. Long before you reached the small supply store, the rich, pungent smell of fermented soybeans and sharp, dark vinegar would hit your nose. The shopkeeper stood behind a worn wooden counter, guarding massive, dark ceramic vats. When you handed over your bottle, they would use a beautiful, long-handled bamboo ladle to scoop the dark liquid out of the depths of the vat. They would place a tin funnel over your bottle and pour the liquid with practiced, steady precision. Not a single drop was ever spilled. As a child, you could not resist swiping your finger across the rim of the bottle to taste that intense, salty drop of soy sauce on the walk back home. It was a chore that made us feel responsible, deeply connecting us to the rhythms of the neighborhood and the trusted faces of the local merchants. We must talk about the ultimate symbol of success and marriage in the 1970s, the 3 big items. If a young man wanted to marry, his family had to secure a bicycle, a watch, and the sewing machine. Not just any brands either. It had to be a flying pigeon or forever bicycle, a Shanghai brand mechanical watch, and a butterfly or peony sewing machine. These were not mere objects. They were monumental achievements. Do you remember the immense pride of owning that heavy black steel bicycle? Fathers would spend their Sunday mornings lovingly wiping the dust off the frame and polishing the metal spokes until they shone like mirrors in the sun. The Shanghai watch was strapped to the wrist with a profound sense of dignity, its rhythmic, heavy ticking a constant reminder of time and progress. And the sewing machine, with its intricate iron foot pedal, was the heartbeat of the home. I can still hear the rapid, comforting whir of the needle late at night, as mothers skillfully stitched together not just rough cotton fabric, but the very hopes and dreams of a new family. Acquiring these 3 items often took years of saving and calling in favors for the right coupons, making them priceless family heirlooms. Now let us bring back the magic of the neighborhood courtyard television. In an era when private entertainment was non-existent, a television set was a community gathering point. Usually only one relatively wealthy family in the entire courtyard owned a small 14-inch black and white television. After dinner, as the summer heat began to break, the ritual began. Children and adults alike would carry their own small wooden or bamboo stools out into the open courtyard. We sat shoulder to shoulder, entirely filling the small space. The owner of the television would carefully place it on a tall table by the window, adjusting the long metal rabbit ear antennas to fight through the snowy static on the screen. The broadcast signal was terrible, the picture constantly rolling or fading to gray. But we did not care. We watched revolutionary dramas, early martial arts shows, or the evening news in absolute captivated silence. When something funny happened, the collective laughter echoed loudly against the brick walls. We gasped together, we cried together. We did not just consume a television program, we shared a profound communal experience. The scream was small, but the sense of belonging it created was immeasurably vast. One of the most physically demanding yet deeply nostalgic memories is the use of honeycomb coal briquettes. These heavy cylindrical blocks of coal dust, pierced with holes to allow airflow, were our only source of cooking and heating. Do you remember the sharp, sulphurous smell of coal smoke that hung over the entire city every winter morning? Waking up in the freezing, pitch-black dark to tend to the stove was a harsh duty. You had to use long, heavy iron tongs to carefully grip a fresh, cold briquette. The true test of skill was aligning the holes of the new briquette perfectly with the glowing orange embers of the dying one underneath it. If you misaligned them, the fire would suffocate and die, and you would have to start all over with precious wood kindling. When done correctly, you could hear a gentle, satisfying crackle as the new coal slowly caught fire, sending a wave of desperately needed warmth through the small, damp room. Your hands would be permanently stained with black ash, and the walls of the kitchen were darkened by the soot. It was a dirty, exhausting daily chore, but that glowing red stove was the very soul of the house, keeping the bitter winter frost at bay. Let us reflect on the beautiful, forgotten art of patching clothes. There was a famous saying back then, new for 3 years, old for 3 years, and patched for 3 more years. Nobody threw away a garment simply because it had a hole in it. Clothing was made of incredibly thick, stiff cotton that was meant to endure. As children grew, clothes were handed down from the eldest sibling to the youngest. When the fabric at the knees or the elbows finally wore dangerously thin, mothers would go to work. Under the dim yellow light of a low-wattage incandescent bulb, they would carefully select a piece of scrap fabric. Often the patch did not match the original color at all, resulting in trousers adorned with colorful contrasting squares. I can vividly remember the rough, heavy feeling of those thick stitches against my skin. We wore these heavily patched clothes to school without an ounce of shame, because every single child in the classroom looked exactly the same. We did not view our mended clothes as a sign of desperate poverty, but rather as a badge of honorable frugality. We repaired the things we loved with patience and deep respect, a stark contrast to today's culture of instant disposal. Connected to the scarcity of clothing was the ingenious, slightly absurd invention of the fake collar. When high-quality cotton cloth was heavily rationed, people still possessed a deep desire to look dignified, neat, and professional. To solve this problem, the fake half-collar was born. It was simply the collar and the top few inches of a dress shirt, attached to strings. You would tie it tightly around your neck and chest, and then put your heavy, dark mouse suit jacket over it. From the outside, it gave the perfect, flawless illusion that you were wearing a crisp, clean white shirt underneath. Do you remember the feeling of that stiff, heavily starched cotton pressing sharply against your chin and neck? It was uncomfortable, and in the heat of summer, the thick jacket worn to hide the strings was sweltering. But taking off the jacket in public was absolutely out of the question, as it would reveal the secret of the fake collar. This quirky garment was a powerful symbol of our people. Even in times of extreme material scarcity, we desperately held on to our self-respect, our desire for tidiness, and our pride. We made the absolute best of exactly what little we had. Do you remember the very first day of the new school year and the deeply revered ritual of wrapping our textbooks? Books were incredibly precious, and we were terrified of tearing the thin covers or dirtying the pages with our ink-stained fingers. We could not afford manufactured plastic covers. Instead, families would hoard old, large-format calendars or thick, discarded newspapers for months. On the night before school started, we would sit at the table with our parents. The smell of the fresh, sharp printer ink from the new textbooks filled the room. We would carefully fold the thick calendar paper over the book, pressing the creases down sharply with our thumbnails to make perfect, crisp edges. Sometimes, if you were lucky, the outside of your math book would feature a beautiful, glossy picture of a mountain landscape or a famous painting from the calendar. Finally, we would take a brush or a pen and write our names and our class number in our very best, most careful calligraphy on the front. This gentle, meticulous process instilled in us from a very young age a profound, almost sacred respect for knowledge, education, and the fragile paper upon which it was printed. Let us step out into the crisp morning air and remember the broadcast calisthenics. It is an experience uniquely shared by an entire generation. Every single morning, precisely at the same time, the crackle of loudspeakers mounted on tall wooden poles would echo across schoolyards, factory grounds, and city squares. A booming, energetic voice accompanied by triumphant marching music would command the entire nation to stretch and move. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people would stand in perfectly neat, regimented rows. Can you hear the collective, rhythmic sound of thousands of canvas shoes shuffling and jumping on the dusty, dry ground? We swung our arms, twisted our waists, and touched our toes in perfect synchronization with our classmates and co-workers. The morning air filled your lungs as you moved. Some people complained about it, doing the motions lazily, while others performed every stretch with fierce military precision. But looking back, there was an incredible, undeniable magic in that routine. It gave rhythm to our days. For those 15 minutes, you were not just an isolated individual facing a hard day of labor. You were breathing and moving as one unified part of a massive shared community. Think back to the endless journeys on the green-skinned slow trains. Long before a high-speed rail could whisk you across the country in hours, traveling meant boarding a massive, heavy iron beast, painted in dark, utilitarian green. The journey was measured not in hours, but in days and nights. You remember the heavy rhythmic clacking of the steel wheels on the tracks, a sound that vibrated deep in your bones. The dense black smoke from the locomotive would blow past the open windows, leaving a fine layer of soot on your face and clothes. Inside, the carriages were incredibly crowded. People sat on extremely hard, upright wooden seats, shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers. The aisles were packed tight with canvas duffel bags and woven plastic sacks. But within that cramped space, a beautiful micro-society formed. The endless rhythmic sound of sunflower seeds being cracked open filled the air. Strangers became sudden friends, eagerly sharing hard-boiled eggs, dried sweet potatoes, and long winding stories over lukewarm tea in glass jars. The journey was exhausting, sweaty, and painfully slow, but it forced us to connect, to talk, and to share the passage of time together. We must not forget the beautiful icy relief of summer popsicles, and the absurd way they were sold. In the scorching, suffocating heat of a Beijing or Shanghai summer, the most beautiful sound in the world was the sharp, repetitive clack of a wooden block hitting a wooden box. It was the vendor on his heavy delivery bicycle. Attached to the back rack was a large square wooden box, but the most absurd detail, the one that makes us smile today, is what was inside. To keep the precious ice pops from melting under the blazing sun, the vendor wrapped them in thick, incredibly heavy white winter cotton quilts. The beautiful contradiction of using a thick winter blanket to keep things frozen still feels like magic. We would hand over a couple of tiny coins, and the vendor would lift the heavy quilt, releasing a wonderful, brief puff of cold air. We would eagerly grab the wooden stick. The icy, incredibly sweet taste of mung bean, red bean, or hawthorn berry melting rapidly on our tongues was pure heaven. It was not fancy ice cream filled with dairy and chemicals. It was just sweet water and beans. But it was the absolute greatest luxury a child could ever imagine. Let us quietly remember the thrill of cassette tapes and the sweet allure of what was once called decadent music. In the early 1980s, before the internet gave us every song in the world, music was a precious, tangible thing. We had those delicate rectangular plastic cassette cases. The brown magnetic tape inside was fragile and would sometimes ruthlessly tangle inside the player, forcing us to carefully wind it back up using a wooden pencil. Do you remember secretly listening to the sweet, whispered, incredibly romantic voice of Teresa Teng? Her melodies floated across the water from Taiwan, officially frowned upon by the authorities, but universally, passionately loved by the people. We would close our bedroom doors, press the soft mechanical play button on a bulky tape recorder, and let the gentle music wash over us. Because original tapes were rare and expensive, we constantly copied them for our friends using dual cassette decks. With every single copy, the sound quality degraded, until the beautiful singing was buried under a thick, ghostly hiss of static. But we listened anyway, eyes closed, dreaming of a wider, softer world hidden within those beautiful, forbidden melodies. Let us talk about a daily routine that modern advertisements would deem a nightmare: washing our hair. Long before supermarket shelves were lined with dozens of fragrant, perfectly formulated chemical shampoos in bright plastic bottles, hygiene was a much rougher, simpler affair. Do you remember the harsh, earthy, incredibly strong smell of brown laundry soap? Or perhaps your grandmother used boiled soap locust pods, creating a natural, murky liquid. You would lean over that chipped enamel basin, pouring cold or lukewarm water over your head with a chipped tin mug. You rubbed the hard bar of soap directly onto your scalp, working up a rough, thick lather. The soap stung your eyes terribly if you were not careful. Rinsing it out took several mugs of water, and when your hair finally dried, it felt squeaky clean. yet incredibly stiff and heavy, almost like straw. There was no conditioner, no smoothing serums, no blow dryers. You simply sat by the open window and let the warm summer breeze dry your hair. It was a time when cleanliness was strictly practical, entirely devoid of vanity or luxury, grounding us in the raw, unpolished reality of our daily existence. We must revisit the dusty playgrounds of our youth and the intense, passionate economy of cigarette folders. Children back then did not have expensive plastic toys or video games. Our absolute greatest treasures were literally scavenged from the dirt. We would tirelessly search the streets for discarded, colorful paper cigarette boxes. We carefully flattened them out and then folded them into thick, triangular or square cards. Do you remember the rough, calloused feeling of your knees on the dusty ground as you played? You would take your heaviest, thickest folded card and throw it down with a sharp, violent slapping sound, desperately trying to flip your opponent's card over with the wind of the impact. The sound of cardboard hitting the dirt was the soundtrack of our afternoons. We traded them, argued over the rare brands, and guarded our thick stacks with our lives. Your hands would be completely black with grime, your trousers ruined at the knees, but the sheer, unadulterated joy of winning a slightly torn, dirty piece of cardboard felt like you had just conquered the entire world. It was pure imagination, turning absolute trash into magnificent treasure. Let us quietly recall the incredibly soothing, rhythmic clicking of bamboo knitting needles. Winter clothing was expensive and difficult to buy, so the mothers and grandmothers of the 1980s became master creators. But they rarely bought brand new yarn. Instead, when a child outgrew a sweater, the mother would meticulously unravel it. Can you picture the crinkled, wavy texture of the unraveled yarn? To straighten it out, she would wrap it tightly around the backs of 2 wooden chairs, or hold it over the hissing steam of a boiling water kettle until it relaxed. Then the magic began. Sitting by the window to catch the fading afternoon light, her hands would move in a blur of practiced automatic motion. She was knitting a new sweater by hand, weaving profound love, fierce protection, and incredible warmth into every single stitch. The finished sweater was heavy, dense, and sometimes slightly scratchy, but slipping it over your head on a freezing winter morning was like being wrapped in a permanent physical embrace. We did not just wear clothes back then. We wore the visible, tangible evidence of a mother's endless sacrifice and boundless love. Think about the massive wooden storage chests that dominated our small bedrooms. Because modern, built-in closets simply did not exist in those cramped apartments. Families relied on heavy, deeply carved camphor wood chests. They sat solidly in the corner of the room, acting as both storage and furniture. Do you remember the distinctive, incredibly sharp herbal scent of the camphor wood? It was a magical smell that effortlessly kept moths and insects away from the precious fabrics inside. You would turn the heavy brass key in the cold metal padlock and lift the heavy wooden lid with a creak. Inside were the family's most prized possessions: the impossibly thick, heavy winter cotton quilts, the bright red silk blanket saved for a future wedding, or the single, sharply tailored suit your father owned. The smooth, polished flat top of the chest often served as a makeshift desk where you did your homework under a dim lamp, or a table where the family radio proudly sat. Those camphor chests were the silent, steadfast keepers of our family history, holding on to the things we cherished most deeply, protecting them against the passage of time. Finally, as promised, let us remember the most beautiful and slightly absurd sight of all: the entire family riding on one single bicycle. Today, cars clog the wide avenues, isolating us in metal boxes. But back then, the heavy, sturdy black steel frame of the flying pigeon bicycle was the family minivan. Can you see it in your mind? The father at the helm, his strong, measured strokes pushing the heavy pedals against the wind. The eldest child sitting nervously on the thin metal rear rack. The mother sitting gracefully side-saddled behind the father, holding tightly onto his waist. And the youngest child, perhaps you, sitting sideways on the cold metal top tube between the seat and the handlebars, the rushing wind bringing tears to your eyes. You would hear the gentle, cheerful ringing of the metal bell clearing the path through the dusty, chaotic streets. It was dangerous by today's standards, utterly lacking in modern safety. But in that moment, moving through the city, you were physically pressed against the people who loved you most. You moved as a single, breathing, unbreakable unit. That bicycle carried not just our bodies, but the heavy, beautiful weight of our unbreakable family bond. When we look back at these 20 habits, we realize a profound truth. We do not necessarily miss the bitter cold mornings, the heavy patched clothes, or the exhausting daily chores. What we truly miss is the overwhelming sense of closeness, the quiet simplicity, and the vivid, colorful feeling of our own youth. We miss an era where every single thing we touched had immense value, and every neighbor we saw was a vital part of our extended family. The world has grown incredibly fast, loud, and complex, making our past look like an absurd dream. But in our hearts, that dream remains the most beautiful reality we ever lived. Thank you so much for joining me on this deeply personal journey back to the 1970s and 80s. If these memories brought a gentle tear to your eye or a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to preserve these beautiful stories together. Now I want to hear from you. Please tell me in the comments below. What was the most precious everyday item in your home when you were young? I cannot wait to read your beautiful memories.